Welcome back to the designDAD kitchen. I'm Sean, and today we're making my absolute favorite, Grandma's homemade chicken and noodles. Let's get started. For this recipe, you'll need 1 whole fryer chicken, 1 medium yellow onion, a white one will work too, but we don't want a sweet onion, 2 to 2.5 teaspoons of dried minced garlic, or you can use 6 to 8 cloves of fresh, 6 large eggs, 3 49-ounce cans of chicken broth, those are the big ones, herbs de Provence, or a bit of Italian seasoning, flour, salt, and pepper. You may also need some garlic powder and chicken bouillon or chicken stock base to adjust the flavor of your broth at the end. To get started, heat a tablespoon of vegetable oil in a stock pot over medium to medium-high heat. Now while that's heating up, we'll get our chicken ready. Drain the chicken well, and if there's any wrapping around the neck or giblets, go ahead and remove the wrapping and place the neck and giblets back in the chicken. Patting the chicken dry with a paper towel will help the chicken get a good sear. A wet chicken won't brown as well if it browns at all. When the oil is hot and shimmering, drop the chicken in. I usually put the backside down first. Give the pot a good twist and shake to make sure the chicken isn't sticking. While the first side of the chicken is browning, cut 2 or 3 thick slices from your onion and remove the skin. I cut the slices in half so they fit in my pot better. When the first side of the chicken is a nice golden brown, flip it over and add your onions around the sides. Give it another good twist and shake to make sure nothing sticks. Add a few generous pinches of salt and some fresh ground pepper. Remember, you can always add more later, so err on the side of too little. When the second side of the chicken is browned and the onions have softened, add 3 large cans of chicken broth. This likes to splash, so be careful. If your stock pot doesn't hold 3 full cans, just fill it to about an inch below the rim. Now I hate peeling garlic, so most of the time I just use dried minced garlic. You can use garlic powder if you don't have a choice, but it really doesn't taste the same. I also add 1 to 2 teaspoons of herbs de Provence, but you could use Italian seasoning or even just a bit of thyme and basil or oregano if you need to. Stir this in a bit, cover it, and bring it to a simmer. Now this was boiling a bit too hard, so I turned the heat down a little. After a few hours, turn the chicken over, cover it again, and continue cooking. You can cook this for as little as 2 to 3 hours. I tend to cook mine for closer to 4 or more if I forget. Now, if your tongs have a channel in them like mine do not tip them up when you're moving the chicken. Otherwise, you end up with boiling broth running right down the tongs and down your forearm. It's not fun. I like to strain my broth twice. The first time through a mesh strainer catches all the large bits and any chicken that I missed. My broth never fits in my next smallest pot, so I always have to use a second one to get it all. Wipe out any gunk from your empty stock pot and just remember, it's still hot. The second strain might seem a bit odd, but I realized a few years back that straining everything through a kitchen towel or even a heavy paper towel not only catches the small bits of gunk, but also a huge amount of the fat, and that keeps me from having to skim my broth for an hour afterwards. Place a colander on top of your stock pot and line it with a clean kitchen towel. Carefully pour your broth in a bit at a time as it drains through. See what all we kept out of the broth? Turn the heat back on your broth and it's chicken picking time. Be very careful not to leave any small bones in the chicken. Set the chicken aside for later and clear your counter off to make noodles. I start with 6 whole eggs, add a pinch of salt, and whisk just enough to combine. Now there's no set amount of flour for this recipe, you kind of have to go by feel. Adding no more than about a cup at a time, you can generally mix in the first 2 cups with the whisk before you have to switch to mixing by hand. When it hits this stage, get all the dough out of your whisk, add enough flour to the top to keep things from sticking, and then scrape all the dough from the bottom of the bowl. You can start mixing in a bit more flour if the dough isn't quite manageable yet. Turn the dough out onto a well-floured surface, and using your hands and a bench scraper if you've got one, continue kneading the flour into the dough a bit at a time until you have a soft dough that isn't trying to stick to everything in sight. It's easier for me to roll out the noodles in 2 batches. Keeping your dough and counter well floured, roll out the dough, turning and flipping frequently. Noodles will roughly double in thickness when they cook, so I roll mine out as thin as I can get them. Do yours however you'd like, but thicker noodles will need a little bit longer to cook. Now, Grandma used to cut her noodles with a knife. My mom used a pizza cutter, and later a little multi-bladed roller like this. I think they sell them as herb mincers. Either way, they're a huge time saver, and I love mine. Now, this is really important. Make sure your broth tastes good before you add your noodles. It's a lot easier to season up beforehand. It may be perfect right off the bat, or you may need to add some salt, some chicken bouillon, even a bit of garlic powder, sometimes all three. Once it tastes good and it's up to a rolling boil, add your noodles, stirring as you go. Keeping a good dusting of flour on the noodles when you add them helps thicken up the broth. I usually add my first batch of noodles, then I add the chicken, you don't need to shred it, and then roll and add the second half of my noodles while that starts to cook. Noodles soak up a lot of liquid, so you may not end up needing to add all of your noodles. If you add too many at once, you may end up with no broth at all before you know it. Finish things off with a bit of fresh ground pepper, and cook until the broth is as thick as you'd like and the noodles are tender. For me, that ends up being about 30 minutes or so. After that, ladle up a huge bowl and enjoy.